Isn't it just mind-blowing? We're walking around with, what, over 300 different types of smell receptors in our noses? I mean,
Uh-huh.
compare that to the mere three color receptors that paint the entire visual world for us. Three.
It's a huge difference.
300. So you've really got to wonder, what does this vast sort of hidden landscape of scent truly mean for how you perceive and, navigate everything around you?
Well, that's exactly the fascinating territory we're exploring today.
Yeah.
Forget just a quick sniff. We're taking a proper deep dive into the incredible science of smell.
Okay.
We're drawing from sources that unpack everything from the tiniest molecular dances that kick off our sense of smell all the way to the uh, rich cultural stories whispered by aromas throughout history.
Absolutely. And we've unearthed some amazing stuff. On one side, we're looking at these fundamental scientific explorations, like what's actually happening at the receptor level.
Right, the nuts and bolts.
And then on the other side, some really eye-opening cultural analyses examining how smells mold our societies and even, our most cherished memories. It feels like a real 360-degree view.
It really is. And for our listeners, our mission today is to, well, cut through the complexity.
Hmm.
We want to deliver the core understanding of how your sense of smell works,
Mhm.
why certain odors grab your attention so powerfully,
Yeah.
and the surprising ways scents are woven into the fabric of our cultures and our past. We're aiming for those aha moments, but without getting totally lost in the scientific weeds.
Okay, sounds good. Let's get right to the heart of it then. The basic mechanics. How does your nose even detect what's floating around in the air?
It's actually a beautifully elegant process. Uh, think of it like a lock clicking perfectly into place with its key.
Okay.
So floating around you are countless tiny odorant molecules. On the surface of your olfactory neurons, these are the nerve cells in your nose, are specific protein receptors. Each receptor has a unique shape, like a tiny lock.
Good.
And only an odorant molecule with the precisely matching size and shape the key can bind to that receptor and trigger a signal to your brain.
Wow.
This incredible specificity is why we can distinguish between so many different scents.
So it really is all about that perfect molecular fit, like a microscopic puzzle piece slotting in. And if the key doesn't quite fit, you just don't smell anything.
Precisely. The three-dimensional shape and size of the odorant molecule are absolutely crucial for that recognition step.
Okay.
And this actually explains something called specific anosmia, the inability to smell one particular odor.
Oh, right. I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's very likely that someone with specific anosmia is missing, or maybe has a non-functional version of the specific receptor designed to detect that specific scent molecule. The lock is missing, essentially.
That's wild to think about. So even before you consciously go, okay, that's coffee brewing, your brain is already getting these very specific molecular signals,
Yep.
which makes me wonder then, why do we instantly love some smells and find others just completely repulsive? Is that all learned behavior, or is there something more, primal going on?
That's a great question. That immediate gut reaction, that feeling of, oh, yes, I like that, or, oh, don't get that away, even before you could put a name to the smell, is fascinating.
Yeah.
And while your personal history and cultural background definitely shape your preferences over time, there's strong evidence for smells that are intrinsically good or bad, at least from a survival point of view.
Okay, like built-in responses.
Exactly. Take thiols, for example.
Mm.
These are sulfur-containing compounds, and they pop up when things start to decay, to putrefy.
Oh, right. You mean that unmistakable rotten egg or like sulfurous kind of smell, nasty stuff?
Exactly that. Their odor is so potent and almost universally unpleasant that it triggers an immediate sense of aversion. It's like a danger alarm going off in your brain.
Okay.
We seem to be hardwired to recognize these as signs of something potentially harmful, spoiled food, decay.
Makes sense.
And because these compounds are such effective warning signals, they're actually intentionally added to otherwise odorless cooking gases like methane, propane, or butane, so you can smell a leak.
Oh, wow. So that gas smell isn't the gas itself?
Nope, it's the added thiol. It's a literal lifesaver triggered by a deliberately bad smell.
That makes total sense from an evolutionary standpoint. Avoid the rotten stuff. But what about the good smells? Are there molecules that are just universally pleasing?
Well, universally is always tricky, but we do see examples where single chemical compounds elicit generally pleasant responses across many people.
Like what?
Think about cis-3-hexanol. It's a pretty simple molecule, just 6 carbon atoms, but it's the key chemical behind that incredibly evocative scent of freshly cut grass.
Oh, yeah. Everyone knows that smell.
Right. Or think about 1-octantriol, a slightly larger molecule with 8 carbons. That's the dominant aroma you get from mushrooms. Earthy, sort of damp.
Mm-hmm. It's astonishing, really, how just one single type of molecule can conjure up such vivid sensory experiences and feelings.
It really underscores the immense power packed into these tiny, invisible molecules.
Definitely. Now, we've talked about individual molecules fitting into receptors, but the world of smell is obviously so incredibly layered and complex. How do scientists even begin to map out this vast olfactory landscape? It feels almost infinite.
Yeah, you've hit on the core challenge there.
Yeah.
Creating a straightforward olfactory map of chemical structures is incredibly difficult, precisely because of the sheer richness and complexity of the smell world.
It's not like colors, is it?
Exactly. We can try to find patterns, maybe create general guidelines based on structural similarities, like certain functional groups tend to smell a certain way,
Yeah.
but the reality is far more nuanced than a simple chart. It's just not as clear-cut as the visual spectrum.
Right, with vision, you can see that gradual shift, red smoothly blending into orange, then yellow. It's a continuous gradient. But smell doesn't seem to work quite like that.
Precisely. Tiny, tiny tweaks to a molecule's structure can result in wildly different perceived smells.
Really, like what kind of tweaks?
Okay, so take menthol, right?
Yeah.
That instantly recognizable, minty, cooling aroma.
Hmm.
If you just shift the position of a tiny part of that molecule, the ROH group, the alcohol group,
Yeah.
you get alpha terpene. And that smells distinctly floral, like lilac or pine.
Wow, just moving one bit.
Just moving one bit, it really highlights that the overall three-dimensional shape of the molecule is often more critical in determining its odor than just the presence of a specific chemical group like that NOH.
So shape trumps the functional group sometimes?
Often, yes. We see similar effects with, let's see, p-menthine ethyl. Adding that sulfur hydrogen group, the NSH, gives you that characteristic zesty grapefruit scent.
Okay.
But then modify it slightly differently, add a ketone group instead, and suddenly you have the powerful, almost pungent aroma of blackcurrant.
It's almost like a microscopic sculpture determining the smell. It's
Yeah.
like nature's own scent palette.
In a way, it absolutely is. And that actually brings us to a fascinating collaboration, the one between the world of science and the art of perfumery in understanding smell.
Ah, right, because perfumers work with this stuff all the time.
Exactly. Chemistry labs aren't just recreating natural scents, although they do that too. Things like finding ways to make ambrox and ambronol, which mimic rare ambergris.
This stuff from Wales, right.
Very expensive.
Very expensive and rare, yeah. Or developing sustainable sandalwood scents because the natural trees are becoming endangered. But they're also synthesizing entirely new molecules, ones that don't exist in nature, with unique olfactory profiles specifically for use in perfumes.
So, while the scientists are busy dissecting the molecular building blocks, the perfumers are like the composers, arranging these scent elements to create entirely new olfactory symphonies.
That's a great analogy. Exactly. And speaking of the scientific exploration, a really crucial breakthrough in understanding how we perceive these molecules was the discovery of something called odorant binding proteins, or OBPs.
OBPs. Okay, what are those all about?
Well, the discovery of these proteins, initially in samples from cows back in the late 1970s, was a real game changer for the field.
How so? It basically made in-depth the biochemical investigation of the olfactory system much more achievable. That, in turn, drew more scientific attention and, frankly, resources to this whole area of research. Before OBPs were found, the actual olfactory receptors themselves, the lots we talked about, were proving incredibly difficult to isolate and study directly.
Why was that? What made them so tricky compared to these OBPs?
Well, imagine trying to find just a few specific, very tiny components embedded within a complex cell membrane. That's kind of what it was like trying to study the olfactory receptors directly. They're present in very small quantities stuck in the cell surface.
Okay, needles in a haystack.
Pretty much.
Mm.
OBPs, on the other hand, turned out to be much more abundant in the mucus lining the nose, and they're soluble, making them easier to purify in larger quantities.
Ah, okay.
This meant scientists could finally isolate these proteins and start to properly investigate their structure and figure out how they interact with the odorant molecules. It was a crucial stepping stone to understanding the bigger picture.
So how do they actually go about doing that back then? How do you even begin to study something so incredibly small and specific?
Right, so the next vital step was purification, getting the OBPs on their own to get a clear picture of their structure and, importantly, how they bind to odorants. A researcher named Krishna Prasad, who already had a background in olfactory research, joined the effort.
Okay.
And around the same time, actually, another research team over in Italy was also making significant progress independently. They used techniques like electrophoresis, using electric fields to separate proteins based on size and charge.
Right.
Then, to figure out the actual sequence of amino acids that make up the OBP, they employed methods to basically break down the protein bit by bit and identify its individual components.
And this was all happening before really advanced rapid genetic sequencing became widely available, right? It sounds incredibly painstaking, labor-intensive.
Absolutely. It was slow, meticulous work.
Yeah.
But here's the clever part. Even determining just a short sequence of the protein, maybe just a few amino acids long, was enough.
How could that be enough?
Because scientists could then use that short amino acid sequence information to design and create a corresponding short piece of DNA called an oligonucleotide trope.
Okay.
This oligonucleotide acted like a sort of molecular fishing lure. It allowed them to pull out and specifically amplify the entire gene that codes for that OBP from the cow's DNA library.
Ah, using PCR.
Exactly. Using a technique called PCR, the polymerase chain reaction, this was revolutionary technology, really taking off in the 1980s. It allows scientists to make millions or billions of copies of a specific DNA sequence. So suddenly it became much, much easier to study that gene. Think of it like going from having a single hard-to-read blueprint to having thousands of perfect copies.
Wow. So a tiny snippet of protein information acted like a key to unlock the entire genetic code for it.
That's incredible. And what did they ultimately discover about the structure of these OBPs? What do they actually, look like at a molecular level? They discovered that OBPs belong to a larger family of proteins known as ellipocalins. These proteins tend to have a characteristic structure, often described as a beta barrel or kind of cup-like shape.
The cup shape.
Yeah, forming a central cavity or pocket. And crucially, the inside of this pocket is hydrophobic. It repels water.
Oh, okay. Why is that important?
Well, proteins typically exist in a watery environment, like the mucus in your nose. But many odorant molecules themselves are actually hydrophobic. They don't mix well with water. So this water-repellent inner pocket of the OBP provides a much more suitable, sort of cozy environment for these odorant molecules to bind into.
Ah, I see. Like a tiny protected dry space where the scent molecule feels right at home away from all the water.
Exactly. That's a good way to put it.
So the OBP essentially grabs the odorant molecule and holds it safely in this protected pocket.
Yeah.
Okay. What happens next? How does that lead to us actually smelling something? Does the OBP trigger the nerve?
That's the interesting part. While OBPs don't directly trigger the nerve signal that results in the perception of smell, that's the job of the olfactory receptors we talked about earlier.
Right, the locks.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But OBPs are thought to play several crucial supporting roles. They might help to concentrate the odorant molecules near the receptors, making detection more efficient. They could help transport these often water-insoluble molecules through the watery mucus layer to reach the receptors on the nerve cells.
Okay, like little ferry boats for smells.
Kind of, yeah. And they might even play a role in clearing away odorant molecules from the receptors after they've done their job, sort of resetting the system so it's ready for the next smell.
So they're like multitaskers in the nose mucus.
Pretty much. And interestingly, similar proteins, called CSPs, chemosensory proteins, have been found in insects doing similar jobs. It suggests that this whole family of binding proteins plays a broad and really fundamental role in chemical communication, in detecting chemicals in the environment across many, many different species.
It's like a whole team of specialized molecules working together behind the scenes, almost invisibly, just so we can appreciate the simple pleasure of, I don't know, a morning coffee or fresh bread. Amazing.
Okay. It really is a complex and finely tuned system.
Okay, now let's shift gears just a bit. We've explored some of the fascinating mechanics, the locks and keys and binding proteins, but our sources also really emphasize that smell goes far beyond just identifying what something is. It's so deeply intertwined with our emotions, our memories, our cultural experiences.
Absolutely. That connection between smells and emotions is incredibly direct and, frankly, powerful.
How does that work in the brain?
Well, when you inhale an odor, the signals travel from your olfactory neurons straight to the olfactory bulbs, which are located right at the front of your brain. And these bulbs have direct links, very short pathways, to the amygdala, which is a key brain region involved in processing emotions, and also to the hippocampus, which is absolutely crucial for learning and memory formation.
Ah, so it's bypassing some of the usual processing steps.
In a way, yes. This unique direct pathway is thought to be why smells can trigger such immediate and potent emotional memories, often much more vividly than our other senses, like sight or sound.
That perfectly explains why a particular scent, maybe baking bread or a certain perfume, can instantly transport you back to a very specific, perhaps long forgotten moment in your childhood. It's so visceral.
Exactly that. But beyond those really personal associations, smell is also profoundly shaped by culture. While there seem to be some universally disliked smells, particularly those linked to the human body, to waste products, likely due to their ancient association with disease.
Yeah, the feel effect again.
Right. But the way we perceive many other smells, especially food smells, for example, is heavily influenced by our cultural background and what we grow up with.
Our sources highlighted a great example of this with methyl salicylate, that distinctive wintergreen scent.
Oh yeah, the root beer smell for some people.
Yeah, exactly. It's a common and appealing flavor in lots of food products in places like Quebec, think candies, drinks. But apparently, it's practically unheard of as a food flavor in Indonesian cuisine.
Right. In Indonesia, the sources point out, floral scents like jasmine, rose, and vanilla are much more prevalent and appreciated in everyday life, even in food contexts sometimes.
That really underscores how our experiences and what we're exposed to, especially from a young age, just fundamentally mold our olfactory preferences. What smells good or bad isn't always innate.
Absolutely. And smells that might initially seem unpleasant or at least unusual, think about things like strong cheese, tobacco, coffee, even vinegar can become positive associations through cultural learning and repeated exposure.
Yeah, think about how many people develop a real fondness for the initially bitter taste and strong aroma of coffee, right? Or maybe certain fermented foods.
Precisely. It's like our noses are constantly being educated, you could say, by our cultural environment, learning what to recognize, what to appreciate, what to perhaps avoid.
That's a good way to put it.
And throughout history, it's interesting, perfumes and aromatic blends haven't just been about smelling good for vanity's sake. They've also often been valued for their perceived health benefits.
Really. Like medicine.
Well, maybe not medicine as we think of it now, but certainly for well-being. Consider something like Eau de la Reine de Hongrie, Queen of Hungary's water.
Yeah.
It was a famous fragrance based mainly on rosemary, popular for centuries.
Okay.
And was widely used not only as a personal scent, but was also believed to have remarkable protective, invigorating, and even medicinal properties. People drank it, rubbed it on themselves.
Wow. So scent has always been more than just a superficial addition, hasn't it? It's been tied to health, identity, maybe even magic sometimes.
Definitely layered with meaning.
Yeah.
Now, one of our sources takes a particularly deep dive into the cultural significance of smells in a very specific context, Russian culture, both traditional and Soviet era.
Right. That sounded fascinating. What were some of the key takeaways for you from that exploration? What stood out?
Oh, the Russian sources provide a really rich case study in just how deeply woven smell is into cultural beliefs, social structures, even politics.
Okay.
For instance, there's a strong and recurring theme, particularly in traditional culture, around the fear of the smell of death.
A fear of the smell itself.
Yes, and quite elaborate olfactory rituals aimed at masking it. Things like using fragrant herbs and flowers, often ones that have been blessed in church, placed around the deceased.
To cover the odor.
To cover the odor, yes, but also seemingly more than that. There was even a widespread belief, according to the sources, that the very scent of death could somehow be contagious, could bring misfortune or illness.
That's a really powerful idea. The very essence of death, having a tangible, almost transmissible quality through its smell. It speaks to a very visceral understanding of mortality, doesn't it?
It really does, and it highlights a really interesting contrasting perception of human scent between the living and the dead found in Russian folklore.
Yeah.
Well, the smell of the living, just the normal human body scent, was often considered highly unpleasant, even offensive, to the deceased or to supernatural beings.
The dead didn't like how we smell.
Apparently not in these stories. In some traditional tales, figures like the witch Baba Yaga could detect intruders, living humans, simply by their characteristic Russian scent, which she found repulsive.
Oh.
As one source noted, the smell of the living was perceived as repulsive and frightening to the dead, just as the smell of the dead was to the living. It's like these two realms, life and death, were defined by opposing olfactory landscapes.
Wow. Like the boundary between life and death is marked by this fundamental shift in scent perception. That's deep.
It is quite profound. And the sources also explore how smells, or even the pointed absence of certain smells, function as really important social markers in pre-revolutionary Russia.
How did that work?
Well, things like the fresh breath, as one source put it, of spacious, clean, well-maintained homes was a clear indicator of high social status. Good ventilation, cleanliness, space. These created an absence of bad odors.
Okay, so not smelling bad was a sign of wealth.
Exactly. Conversely, unpleasant odors, dampness, unwashed bodies, poor sanitation were strongly associated with vulgarity, poverty, and the lower classes. Even the type of furnishings apparently played a role, with the noble smell of oak furniture or the rich, spicy aroma of expensive Eastern fabrics and decor signaling wealth and refinement.
So your nose could essentially give you a pretty good idea of someone's social standing, maybe even before you got a clear look at them or their surroundings.
Precisely. Which leads into another point.
Yeah.
The Russian aristocracy apparently experienced a significant olfactory shock after the Bolshevik Revolution.
Olfactory shock. What does that mean?
Well, due to the dramatic changes in living conditions, losing their large homes, being forced into crowded communal apartments, disruptions to sanitation and hygiene, those who were accustomed to those spacious, relatively odor-free environments suddenly found themselves immersed in crowded, often unsanitary conditions.
I see.
It must have been a stark and likely very unpleasant shift in their everyday olfactory experience, adding another layer of trauma to the social upheaval.
Yeah, that must have been a really disorienting sensory change on top of all the other profound social and political turmoil they were going through.
It certainly seems plausible, and the politicization of scents in Soviet Russia is also quite remarkable, as detailed in the sources.
Politicization. How can you politicize perfume?
Well, perfume names were apparently intentionally chosen to evoke positive emotions and create associations with revolutionary events, figures, and ideologies.
Like what?
You had perfumes with names like Red Dawn, Red Moscow, Red Poppy, even things like Avant-Garde. These names deliberately linked pleasant, desirable scents with potentially complex, sometimes brutal historical periods and the new Soviet identity.
Wow, using perfume as propaganda almost.
In a subtle way, yes. One source refers to it as a form of olfactory repression, using scent to culturally recode historical memory and control perceptions. The very act of choosing and wearing a particular Soviet perfume could become a marker of alignment, of belonging to the new regime.
That's a really subtle, yet potentially incredibly potent way to weave ideology right into the fabric of everyday sensory life.
Indeed. And it stands in fascinating contrast, as the sources point out, to the more natural, historically significant smells like honey, which held deep cultural and symbolic roots in Russia long before the revolution. The often artificial constructed scents of the Soviet era represented a deliberate break from those older, more traditional olfactory associations.
It all really highlights this fascinating tension, doesn't it, between naturally occurring, culturally ingrained smells and the manufactured, often artificial scents that societies create and then deliberately imbue with specific meanings.
Absolutely. Which brings us, in a way, to the somewhat intangible yet incredibly powerful nature of smell itself. Our sources touch on the inherent challenges of, for instance, legally defining ownership of scents.
Right, how do you copyright a smell?
Exactly. It highlights their fleeting, ephemeral quality. You can't really patent a scent in the same way you can protect a physical invention or a visual logo. It's like trying to bottle smoke or hold on to a memory.
Yeah, it's there, powerful, and then it's gone. And the historical gendering of perfume is also mentioned as interesting, traditionally viewed as a predominantly feminine product in many Western cultures, although that perception has definitely been evolving more recently.
True. But perhaps the most enduring and universally relatable aspect of smell, tying back to our earlier point, is its profound connection to memory.
Absolutely.
Scents just have this unique, almost uncanny ability to trigger vivid and deeply emotional recollections, often with a speed and intensity that our other senses simply can't seem to match.
It's that classic Proustian moment, isn't it, where a simple, unexpected scent, like Proust's Madeleine cookie dipped in tea, can unlock a whole floodgate of detailed memories and feelings from the distant past.
Precisely that neurological shortcut we talked about.
So, okay, as we bring our olfactory exploration to a close for today, it feels like we've journeyed through quite a bit. We started with the incredible complexity of our smell system itself, that vast array of receptors, hundreds of them, finely tuned to the molecular world floating around us.
The locks and keys.
The locks and keys, exactly. Then we explored how our perception of smells is this fascinating dance between our biology, those immediate instinctual reactions, maybe to danger signals like thiols, and the profound shaping influence of our culture, which teaches us what to find appealing or repulsive, like with wintergreen or coffee.
Nature and nurture working together.
Yeah. And we've delved into the potent, often subconscious ways that odors impact our emotions, our memories, and even the very structure of our societies, as so vividly illustrated by that deep dive into the rich tapestry of smell in Russian culture, from fearing death scent to politicizing perfume.
It truly is remarkable, isn't it, when you stop and think about it, that these seemingly invisible molecules just drifting in the air wield such a profound influence over our perceptions, our feelings, our memories, even our social interactions.
It really is. And it leaves us, and hopefully you listening, with a thought-provoking question. Considering this profound impact of these tiny invisible molecules on our perceptions, our emotions, and even our societal structures, what other invisible forces might be shaping our world, shaping us in ways we are only just beginning to understand?
That's a big question.
It is. But maybe just paying a little more attention to the olfactory landscape that surrounds you every single day, the smells you encounter, the reactions they provoke, might open up entirely new perspectives.
Definitely something to be more mindful of, for sure. And look, if this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, we really encourage you to maybe explore the fascinating science of olfaction further, or perhaps dig into the rich cultural history of scent in different societies. There's an entire universe of knowledge out there waiting to be, well, sensed.